Crystal Gayle once referred to herself as the accident, a phrase that carried a quiet heaviness beneath its surface. It was not said for sympathy or attention, but rather as a reflection of how she understood her place in a family already stretched to its limits. She was the youngest of 8 children, born into a modest coal mining household in rural Kentucky, where daily life revolved around survival. Food was never guaranteed in abundance. Meals were often made up of thin beans, leftover cornbread, and whatever wild greens could be gathered from the surrounding hills. Nothing was wasted, and everything had to last. Her father worked deep in the coal mines, inhaling black dust day after day, year after year, until his body could no longer endure the strain. By the time she was still a child, the damage had already taken hold. When she was only 8 years old, his health gave out completely, and he collapsed, leaving behind a family already struggling to stay afloat. That loss did not just remove a parent. It reshaped the emotional and financial foundation of the household. At the same time, she grew up in the long shadow of her older sister, Loretta Lynn, whose rising fame made comparisons inevitable. From an early age, whispers followed her, suggesting that any success she might achieve would always belong to someone else first. Yet life has a way of shifting in unexpected directions. Over the years, something inside her began to change. After decades of carrying hair that would eventually reach an astonishing 61 inches, hair that trailed across stages and caused her genuine physical discomfort, after living with grief that never fully disappeared, she began to make choices that surprised those who thought they understood her. The life she eventually created in Nashville would stand in quiet contrast to the hardship she came from. She entered the world with a name that did not sound like it belonged under bright lights or on marquee signs. Born Brenda Gayle Webb on January 9, 1951, she grew up in Butcher Hollow, Kentucky, in a small cabin that struggled to withstand the extremes of nature. In the winter, the structure trembled under the cold, while in the summer, it trapped heat until the air felt suffocating. Dust seemed to exist everywhere, on clothes, on skin, on furniture, and even in the air itself, as though it had settled into every corner of their lives. Food remained limited, and the family learned to stretch whatever they had. There was no indoor plumbing, only an outhouse behind the house, and nights were spent pressed together beneath quilts, while wind slipped through cracks in the walls, whistling through the darkness. Because she arrived at a time when her parents were already worn down physically and financially, Brenda grew up hearing remarks that blurred the line between humor and truth. Calling herself the accident became her way of acknowledging the unspoken tension. Still, even in that environment, something hopeful existed. The surrounding community faced similar struggles, and instead of isolation, they leaned on one another. Neighbors shared food, offered help, and most importantly, shared music. Their living room could transform into a small stage, where worry would give way to laughter by the end of the night. Even as a small child, barely steady on her feet, Brenda would sing. And when she did, the adults listened, as if her voice carried something essential, something that fed more than just the ears. Her mother, Clara, worked relentlessly, her hands becoming worn and aged long before their time. Her father, Melvin, known to many as Ted, continued returning to the mines because his family depended on him. The work gave them income, but it also gave him illness. Over time, coal dust filled his lungs, leading to black lung disease. His breathing grew labored, his coughing constant, until it became part of the household's rhythm. The cloths he used were stained with dark residue, visible proof of what the mines were doing to him. He endured it quietly, masking the damage as long as he could. When the coal mines in Kentucky shut down, the family's already fragile situation worsened. With their primary source of income gone, they made the difficult decision to relocate to Wabash, Indiana, in search of factory work and better medical care. The move brought change, but not relief. The rolling hills and natural beauty of Kentucky were replaced by flat land, factory whistles, and a different kind of isolation. Brenda attempted to adapt, softening her accent to fit in, but poverty remained constant. Food was still scarce, clothes were still patched, and the sense of embarrassment followed her into school. Over time, she learned to make herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. Then came the moment that would define her childhood in ways she could not fully process at the time. In 1959, her father suffered a massive stroke and passed away. She was only 8 years old. The loss was sudden and overwhelming. At his funeral, she did not cry, not because she felt nothing, but because her grief turned inward and locked itself away. It showed up in other ways, through nervous habits like biting her nails until they bled. She withdrew from others, as if speaking too much might cause everything she was holding inside to break free. Her mother, now widowed, had no choice but to continue. There was no time to collapse under the weight of loss. With children still to raise and bills still arriving, she worked tirelessly, taking on whatever job she could find. Brenda watched closely, the exhaustion, the determination, the refusal to give up. From that, she learned something lasting, that love is often expressed through sacrifice, and that survival sometimes leaves no room for quitting. While all of this unfolded, one figure in the family seemed to belong to a completely different reality. Loretta Lynn had already begun building a life in music, stepping into a world far removed from the struggles of home. To Brenda, she was both a sister and a distant symbol of success. That distance created a quiet longing. She missed the closeness that might have existed under different circumstances, and as she grew older, that absence turned into something heavier. When she eventually entered the music industry, she quickly discovered that she was not being seen for who she was. Instead, she was introduced as Loretta's younger sister, and the comparisons never stopped. Although Loretta's support came from genuine love, it carried an unintended burden. It opened doors, but it also made it difficult for Brenda to establish her own identity. Determined to change that, she made a conscious decision to stop imitating anyone else. She began to embrace her own natural sound, softer, smoother, and distinctly her own. By the mid-1970s, after years of recording songs that closely resembled her sister's style, she reached a turning point. Her early success proved she could survive within that framework, but survival was not enough. Signing with United Artists marked a bold shift, and working with producer Alan Reynolds allowed her to redefine her musical direction. Together, they created a sound that blended country roots with a more accessible, polished style. At first, the results were gradual. Songs did not immediately explode in popularity, but Wrong Road Again signaled a change. It climbed the charts and began to reshape how audiences perceived her. Then came the defining moment, Don't It Make My Brown Eyes Blue. The song crossed genre boundaries, reaching both country and pop audiences, and earned her a Grammy Award. At that point, the narrative changed. She was no longer simply someone's sister. She was Crystal Gayle, an artist with her own voice and identity. As her career expanded, so did the legend surrounding her appearance, particularly her extraordinary hair. What many assumed was a calculated image was actually rooted in something deeply personal. At 16, she had made a quiet promise never to cut her hair again. It began as a way to claim control over at least one part of her life. Over time, that decision evolved into a defining feature, with her hair eventually reaching the floor at 61 inches. While audiences admired its beauty, the reality behind it was far less glamorous. Maintaining it required constant effort, and its weight caused physical discomfort, including headaches and neck strain. It could catch on objects, complicate performances, and demand hours of care. Yet she held on to it, partly because it had become inseparable from her public image, and partly because of the emotional significance it carried. Despite the outward success, her life continued to be shaped by loss and resilience. Family struggles persisted, and grief remained a quiet companion. Still, she continued performing, often masking her emotions behind a composed exterior. That polished image became a form of protection, allowing her to navigate both personal pain and professional expectations. One of the most stabilizing forces in her life was her marriage to Bill Gatzimos. Their relationship began long before fame, when she was still Brenda Gayle Webb. He knew her without the influence of success or public perception. Their bond, built on authenticity, endured through uncertainty and change. After marrying in 1971, he took on the role of her manager, handling the business side of her career so she could focus on her music. Together, they built a partnership that remained strong in an industry where many relationships did not survive. Over time, her relationship with Loretta Lynn also evolved. While there were moments of tension shaped by comparison and public perception, love remained at the foundation. In later years, those tensions softened, allowing space for closeness and understanding. After Loretta's passing, the loss brought reflection, deepening her connection to family and memory. Eventually, after decades in the spotlight, she chose a quieter path. Settling into life in Nashville, she stepped away from constant public attention and embraced simplicity. Her days became centered around family, home, and meaningful moments rather than endless appearances. Success had given her the freedom to choose peace over pressure. Looking back, every part of her journey connects seamlessly. The hardships of childhood, the struggle for identity, the music, the relationships, and the resilience that carried her through it all. From a young girl in a struggling household to a celebrated artist who defined her own path, she built a life shaped not only by talent, but by endurance. She proved that gentleness can hold strength, and that true elegance lies in the ability to endure and remain whole despite everything life demands.